My partner of 6 years told me she was leaving me for the accountant we'd hired to sort out our finances. She said, "I hope we can still be civil about this." I told her, "Of course. Completely understand." Then I rang the accountant's firm. That was 8 weeks ago. I'm 63 years old. I've been through a redundancy, a knee replacement, and one spectacularly bad investment in a mate's honey business that shall never be spoken of again. I thought I'd seen most of what life could throw at a person. Turns out I hadn't seen anything yet. Let me back up. Her name was Serena. 51, worked in communications for a regional council, had a laugh you could hear from 3 rooms away. We'd met at a mutual friend's 60th birthday in Tauranga. Been together since, living together for the last 4 of those 6 years in my house in Hamilton. I'd been widowed before her. My wife Carol passed from cancer 11 years ago, and Serena was the first person since Carol who made the mornings feel like something worth getting up for. We were doing well, I thought. We'd talked about the future. Nothing dramatic, just comfortable conversations about maybe doing a campervan trip around the South Island, whether we'd stay in Hamilton or look at something smaller on the coast when I fully retired. That kind of talk. The kind that assumes a shared future without needing to spell it out. About 14 months ago, Serena suggested we get our finances properly sorted. I'd been putting it off for years. I had Super, a small rental property in Rotorua, and a pile of paperwork I kept meaning to deal with. She knew a firm in town. A colleague had used them, very professional, highly recommended. The accountant assigned to us was a man called Declan, late 30s I'd guess. Well presented. Knew his stuff, spoke confidently about structures and trusts, and all the things I'd been too lazy to understand properly. Serena handled most of the meetings with him. I'd sit in when I could, but my hours at work were still variable, and she had more flexibility. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Why would I? We were sorting out our retirement finances. I was grateful she was taking the lead on something I'd been avoiding. The signs, looking back, were obvious. The way she'd be particularly energized after their meetings. The slight delay before answering when I asked how they'd gone. Once, I noticed she'd had her hair done on a day she'd been to see him. And when I mentioned it, she said she'd just felt like it. I believed her because I wanted to. Last March, she asked me to meet her for lunch at a café near the Claudelands Event Center. She seemed nervous when I arrived, turning her coffee cup around in circles on the table. She told me the food here was good, had I ever tried their pie, which was such an odd opener that I knew something was coming. Then she said, "I need to be honest with you. I've developed feelings for Declan. Strong feelings. I think we need to end things." I remember the sounds of the cafe around me. Someone scraping a chair. The coffee machine. A child at the next table, asking for a biscuit. "How long?" I asked. It started gradually. Properly, about 4 months ago. 4 months. I'd been talking to this woman about coastal properties and campervan routes, while she was falling for the man sorting out my retirement savings. "Have you?" I started. She looked at the table. That answered it. "Right," I said. I sat with it for a moment. Then I said what felt honest. "I appreciate you telling me directly. That took something. And I meant it. I did. But I also sat there thinking very clearly about the next phone call I needed to make. She seemed almost confused by my composure. "You're not going to shout?" "No point," I said. "These things happen." She left after we divided up the bill and agreed to talk logistics later in the week. I sat with my coffee for another 10 minutes. Then I rang my son Hamish, who's a solicitor in Wellington. "Need your ears on something," I said. Bit of a situation. Then I looked up the name of the senior partner at Declan's firm. The firm was called Mercer Holloway Associates. I'd paid them close to $9,000 over 14 months. I rang the next morning and asked to speak with the founding partner, a woman named Mrs. Holloway. I said I needed to discuss a matter involving one of her accountants and a significant concern about professional conduct. She took the call. I explained calmly. Declan had developed a personal relationship with my partner of 6 years while engaged as our accountant, over a period of at least 4 months that I was aware of. He'd had access to all my financial records, my super, my rental property, my full asset picture. He'd been in a position of professional trust, and he'd used that position to conduct a private relationship without disclosure. Mrs. Holloway was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Mr. Alderton, I want to thank you for bringing this to us directly. We take professional conduct extremely seriously." "I'm not after anything from the firm," I said. "I just felt you ought to know." What I didn't say was that Hamish had already pointed me to the relevant sections of the Code of Ethics under the New Zealand Institute of Chartered Accountants. A member must not use a professional relationship to gain personal advantage and must avoid any situation that creates a real or perceived conflict of interest. A relationship of this nature, undisclosed and conducted during active engagement, was a textbook breach. 2 days later, Mrs. Holloway rang back. Declan had been placed on immediate suspension pending a formal investigation. The firm was refunding our entire fee, $9,000, and would be in contact about the formal close of our file. She was deeply sorry for any distress. "That's very professional of you," I said. "Thank you. I hadn't asked for the refund. It came anyway." That same week, I got onto the accountant I'd used years ago before I started with Mercer Holloway and got my financial affairs moved back to someone I trusted. The rental property file, the super documentation, all of it. I also quietly let the mutual friend who'd originally recommended the firm know that I'd had a disappointing experience and would be moving on without going into specifics. She asked no questions. Word travels in this town without needing much help. I posted nothing on social media. I'm 63. I don't do that. But I did mention to 2 or 3 people in my golf group that if they were looking for a good accountant, the firm I'd used recently wasn't one I could recommend. That was it. I wasn't dramatic about any of it. Serena rang me 4 days later. "What did you do?" Her voice was tight. "Declan's been suspended. The firm is investigating him. I notified his employer of a conduct concern," I said. "That's all. You said you understood. You said these things happen. They do happen. And professional consequences happen when professional boundaries are crossed. Those two things aren't in conflict, Serena." She called me calculating. Cold. I didn't argue with her about it. What I did think about, though I didn't say it to her, was that Declan had sat across from me in that office and listened to me talk about Carol, about losing her, about finally feeling settled again. I'd told him things in those meetings that a person tells their financial advisor because they need context to give proper advice. He'd used those conversations as the backdrop for something entirely different. That's what I found genuinely hard to forgive, not the relationship itself. The context in which it developed. 3 days after that call, I came home to find Serena's car outside my house. She was on the front step. "I need some of my things," she said. "I'll give you space to get them," I said. "Take what's yours." She went inside and was there for about 20 minutes. When she came out, she stood on the path and said, "He's not who I thought he was. He's been angry since the suspension, blaming me for it." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. "I meant it. In the way you mean it, when you hear that someone made a difficult bed and is now lying in it." "Brett, I'm sorry, I keep saying that wrong. I mean, I don't know what I mean." "It's all right," I said. "Take care of yourself, Serena." She drove away. I made a cup of tea and watched a recording of the previous night's rugby. Life went on, but that wasn't quite the end of it. About 2 weeks after the suspension, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was, "Regarding your complaint, clarification needed." I opened it. It was from Declan. He wrote that my complaint to the firm had been exaggerated and motivated by personal grievance rather than genuine professional concern. He wrote that I had weaponized the professional relationship to punish him for something that was ultimately between me and Serena. He said he had documentation from our meetings that showed I had spoken about Serena in disparaging terms on multiple occasions, and that he would be willing to share this with relevant parties if I chose to pursue the matter further. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to Hamish. Hamish rang me within the hour, and I could tell he was enjoying himself slightly more than a solicitor probably should. So he's threatening to use confidential client communications to discourage you from a professional conduct complaint, he said. That's what it looks like. That's not a threat. That's a gift. He paused. Do you want to send a formal letter? Do whatever you think is appropriate, I said. I'll leave it in your hands. The letter Hamish sent the following morning was 3 pages. It outlined the original conduct concern and the firm's response, then addressed Declan's email directly, using confidential information obtained during a professional engagement to intimidate a former client was itself a serious breach of professional obligations, potentially actionable both through the Institute's complaints process and through civil proceedings. It requested that Declan cease all contact. A copy was sent to Mrs. Holloway at the firm. Mrs. Holloway rang me that afternoon. She sounded tired. She said the firm was now cooperating fully with an institute referral, and that Declan had been formally let go. She also said the firm had become aware that Declan had, without authorization, retained copies of client files that should have been returned to the firm's systems. They were pursuing that separately. She asked if I would be willing to provide a supporting statement to the Institute's conduct panel. I said yes. The investigation took about 6 weeks. I won't go through all of it, but at the end of it, Declan received a formal censure from the Institute, a period of supervised practice required before he could return to any registered accounting role, and a note on his professional record that would follow him forward. The firm made a further payment to me, not a large amount, but an acknowledgement, and issued a formal written apology. It was around this time that I heard from Serena's daughter, Pippa. She'd always been civil with me, more than civil, actually. She'd come to Christmas twice at my place, and we'd gotten on well. She rang one afternoon and said, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry about how this all went. Mom's not doing well. She's back in Wellington, staying with her sister. I'm sorry to hear she's struggling, I said. She knows she made a mistake. I think she thought Declan was going to be some big romantic thing, and it's all just not been that. No, I said. I imagine not. Pippa paused. You were always good to her. I wanted you to know that. I know that. That mattered to me. More than the refund, more than the censure, more than any of the other outcomes. Just a straightforward acknowledgement from a decent young woman that she'd seen what was there. Thank you for ringing, Pippa, I said. That means a lot. I heard through the grapevine this city genuinely is small, that Declan had separated from his own partner sometime in the weeks after the suspension. Apparently they'd been together for several years. I don't know the details and I didn't seek them out. What I do know is that the thing he risked everything for didn't appear to be working out the way he'd imagined. That's not my business, and I take no particular satisfaction in it. But I noticed it. As for me, I'm fine. Genuinely fine. In the way you can only be fine when you're old enough to understand the difference between a catastrophe and a setback. I had 4 sessions with a counselor. Not because I was falling apart, but because Hamish suggested it, and he was right, that talking to someone neutral was useful. I went on a fishing trip to the Tongariro with my brother-in-law, who's been my brother-in-law for 20 years and shows no sign of being anything else. I started doing more of the cooking, which I'd always meant to do more of. I slept well. The rental property in Rotorua is ticking along fine. My super is in good order. My financial affairs are, for the first time in years, genuinely sorted. The irony is that the process that brought all this grief also finally forced me to get my paperwork in order, and I've never had a clearer picture of where I stand. A few months on, a friend of mine, someone I've known since we were in our 30s, one of those people you cannot speak to for 4 months and then have coffee with as if no time has passed, sat across from me and said, "You got out of that better than you went in." And I thought about it. She's probably right. Serena got the relationship she chose. Declan got the consequences of the choices he made inside a professional obligation he'd agreed to uphold. I got my life back. My finances sorted. A refund I hadn't asked for. And about 9 months of clarity I wouldn't have had otherwise. The house feels different now. Quieter. But it's my quiet. That's not a nothing thing when you're 63. If I have anything useful to say from all of this, and I'm old enough to be cautious about offering wisdom, because most of what looks like wisdom is just experience you haven't finished processing yet, it's this. The most important decision you make in any situation like this isn't the dramatic one. It's the quiet decision, in the 10 minutes after you've heard the worst of it, about what kind of person you intend to be going forward. I decided I was going to be calm, accurate, and measured. I wasn't going to perform grief for anyone's benefit, and I wasn't going to perform revenge either. I was just going to deal with what was real. Declan had a professional obligation. He chose not to honor it. The system that governs that profession exists precisely for situations like this. Not as a weapon, but as a mechanism. I used it the way it was meant to be used. That's not vindictive. That's just what accountability looks like when it's working properly. And to anyone who's been in that chair at that cafe, hearing words you didn't expect from someone you thought you knew, the ground does come back. It takes a while, but it comes back. I'm doing all right. Next chapter, and all that. I've been thinking about what actually happened here. Not the surface of it, the suspended accountant, the refund, the formal censure, but the thing underneath all of that. What this story is really about. Declan made a choice. He sat in a position of genuine trust. He knew my finances, my history, the fact that I'd lost my wife, the shape of the life I was trying to build, and he decided that none of that mattered as much as what he wanted. That's not a romantic failing. That's a failure of character. And character, in my experience, isn't something that fails once and recovers cleanly. It tends to show up consistently in the way a person handles small pressures and large ones alike. The blackmail email he sent me wasn't out of character for someone who'd already decided that professional obligations were optional when inconvenient. It was the same person, making the same kind of calculation. What I keep coming back to is the question of intelligence, real intelligence, not the kind measured in any exam. Declan was technically sharp. He understood tax structures and trust arrangements and the finer points of financial law. But he seemed to have no capacity at all for thinking 2 moves ahead in the only game that actually mattered. The one where your choices follow you. He didn't appear to consider what would happen when the thing he'd been hiding came into the light. He seemed genuinely surprised that there were consequences. That's a particular kind of foolishness that no amount of professional qualification can fix. Serena, I don't carry anger toward her. Not really. I think she convinced herself that what she felt was rare enough to justify the cost of it. That happens. People tell themselves stories that let them do what they already want to do. The part that stings, if I'm being honest, isn't that she left. It's that she left through a door that had been quietly opened while I was sitting across the table from the man opening it, talking about my dead wife and my retirement savings. That's the part that took some processing. But here's what I know about resilience, and I know it the way you only know things after 60, which is the hard way. It's not about not feeling the hit. I felt it. I sat in that cafe for 10 minutes after she walked out and felt the full weight of 6 years dissolving over a lunch I hadn't finished. Resilience isn't the absence of that. It's the decision, made quietly and without audience. about what you do next. I decided to deal with what was real. I made accurate, measured decisions. I used the systems that exist for exactly this kind of situation. I didn't perform anything, not grief, not toughness, not revenge. I just kept moving forward with as much dignity as I could manage, one phone call at a time. And the thing is, when you act that way, the outcomes tend to be proportionate. Declan's consequences weren't something I designed. They came from the institution that governs his profession, from his own decision to send that threatening email, from the trail of choices he'd been making for months. I just held the door open for what was already coming. That's all any of us can really do. Make good choices. Hold to what's right. Let the rest follow from there. It usually does.